The Silent Oar. The fog hung heavy over the Manhattan docks, a thick shroud that smelled of salt, rotting timber, and the ever-present stench of the British occupation. In the year 1778, the city was a cage. For Robert, a man of quiet habits and a modest merchant shop, the cage was where he did his best work. He sat in his small office, the candle flickering low, listening to the rhythmic boots of a British patrol passing on the cobblestones outside. Robert did not look like a spy. He looked like a man concerned with the price of lace and tea. But on his desk lay a small scrap of paper, no larger than a thumb. On it, coded numbers told a story of a planned British movement toward the north. The fate of the Continental Army often rested on these tiny fragments of truth. He waited until the footsteps faded before he moved. He stepped out into the night, his coat collar turned up against the damp chill. Every shadow held the potential for a rope or a cell. He walked toward the graveyard of Trinity Church, a place where the dead offered more protection than the living. There, tucked behind a weathered headstone, was the drop point. He tucked the paper into a hidden crevice and disappeared back into the mist. Miles away across the churning grey waters of the Sound, a different kind of man waited. Caleb sat in a small whaleboat, his hands calloused and his eyes sharp even in the dark. He was a creature of the water. To him, the British frigates were just obstacles to be outmaneuvered. He received the signal from the shore, a brief flash of a lantern that looked like a distant star. The rowing was a silent art. Caleb and his men had wrapped their oars in old rags to muffle the sound against the oarlocks. Every splash was a risk. The Sound was patrolled by the greatest navy in the world, yet here was a handful of men in a wooden boat, carrying the secrets that would break an empire. Caleb reached the rocky shore of Long Island, where the next link in the chain waited. The information moved from hand to hand, through forests and over fences, avoided by patrols and whispered in taverns. It was a war of whispers. When the intelligence finally reached the camp of General Washington, the sun was beginning to rise. The general read the report by the light of a fading campfire. Because of a merchant in a foggy city and a rower on a cold sea, the American forces knew exactly where the blow would fall. They moved before the British could strike, turning a potential disaster into a strategic retreat that saved the army. The names of these men were not shouted in the streets. There were no medals given in the dark. They returned to their shops and their boats, living as ordinary men in extraordinary times. But the history of the nation was written in the silence of their work, a testament to the fact that the greatest revolutions are often won by those who are never seen. The Southern Gambit. The year 1781 brought a different heat to the conflict. The war had moved like a slow fever, burning through the colonies until it settled in the humid woods of Virginia. In the small town of Yorktown, the British Army had dug their heels into the earth. General Cornwallis felt secure, believing the sea behind him was a gateway for British reinforcements. He did not know that the invisible web was tightening around him. The information gathered by the silent watchers in the north had served its purpose, keeping the flame of rebellion alive during the darkest winters. Now the focus turned to a young man named James. He moved through the British camps with a tray of food or a bundle of laundry, a face so familiar to the soldiers that they stopped seeing him at all. To them, he was just part of the landscape. To the Americans, he was the eyes and ears inside the lion's den. James watched the fortifications grow. He noted the placement of the cannons and the dwindling supplies in the storehouses. Every night he would slip away into the woods to meet a rider. There were no long speeches, only the quiet exchange of maps and numbers. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant sound of the surf. While James watched from within, a massive French fleet was cutting through the Atlantic. This was the master stroke. The intelligence provided by men like Robert and Caleb had convinced the French that this was the moment to strike. They arrived at the mouth of the Chesapeake, blocking the escape route that Cornwallis so desperately counted on. The siege began with a thunder that shook the very foundation of the town. The American and French forces moved in unison, guided by the precise knowledge of where the British defences were weakest. The trenches moved closer every night, dug by men who knew exactly which path to take to avoid the heaviest fire. Inside the town, the atmosphere changed from confidence to despair. The reinforcements never came. The gates remained shut. On a clear morning in October, the white flag finally rose above the smoke. The world turned upside down as the British marched out to surrender, their drums beating a melancholy tune. James stood on a nearby hill, watching the redcoats stack their muskets. He did not join the cheering crowds. He simply turned and began the long walk back to the life he had known before the world caught fire. He had no uniform to return, no rank to relinquish. He was a man who had seen the birth of a nation from the shadows, and for him, that was enough. The war ended not just with the flash of bayonets, but with the quiet persistence of those who refused to be broken. The maps were redrawn, the flags were changed, and the story of a new people began. It was a victory built on thousands of small acts of courage, performed by ordinary people whose names would mostly be lost to time, but whose legacy would live on in every breath of the free air they helped to win. The River of Destiny. As the new nation began to breathe, the eyes of the people turned toward the setting sun. The year 1803 marked a shift in the soul of the country. A vast territory had been acquired, a wilderness of such scale that few could even imagine its borders. Two men, Meriwether and William, were chosen to lead an expedition into the unknown. Their task was not to fight a war of muskets, but a war against the elements, the mountains, and the sheer distance of the world. They began their journey on the brown waters of the Missouri River. The boats were heavy with supplies, including journals, ink, and scientific instruments. They were tasked with recording everything, from the types of soil to the languages of the people who had lived there for centuries. The heat of the summer was relentless, and the river was a temperamental beast, filled with fallen trees and shifting sandbars that threatened to swamp their crafts. Along the way, they met a young woman named Sacagawea. She carried a small child on her back and a deep knowledge of the land in her mind. She became the bridge between worlds. When the expedition encountered the high, jagged walls of the Rocky Mountains, it was her presence that signaled peace to the tribes they met. She knew which routes were safe to eat, and which mountain passes would not lead to a dead end. The winter at the edge of the world was a test of endurance. They built a fort of logs near the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. The rain was constant, and the salt air ate at their clothes and their spirits. They spent the long nights writing by candlelight, filling their journals with sketches of birds and maps of rivers that no one in the East had ever seen. They were mapmakers of a future they would not live to fully see. When they finally turned back toward home, they were different men. They had seen the Great Plains teeming with millions of buffalo, and they had stood where the land finally touched the sea. The journey back was a race against time and the coming snow. When they finally paddled back into the docks of St. Louis, the people cheered as if they had returned from the moon. The maps they brought back changed everything. The wilderness was no longer a blank space on a page, but a land of promise and peril. The trail they blazed would soon be followed by thousands of wagons, by families looking for a new start, and by a nation that was growing faster than its own laws could follow. The story of the continent was no longer just about the old cities of the coast. It was about the vast, open spaces and the people who were brave enough to walk into them. The silence of the deep woods and the roar of the great waterfalls became the new music of the American spirit. A song of expansion and the restless desire to see what lay over the next horizon. The Iron Spine. The year 1863 saw the beginning of a task that many called impossible. The nation was torn apart by internal conflict. Yet in the dust of the plains and the granite of the mountains, a new dream was being forged. It was the dream of a track that would link the Atlantic to the Pacific, a ribbon of iron that would change the very meaning of distance. Two companies started from opposite ends, one pushing west from the river banks of Nebraska and the other carving east from the golden hills of California. The work was brutal and the conditions were unforgiving. In the west, thousands of laborers from across the sea climbed the steep faces of the Sierra Nevada. They worked with hand drills and black powder, blasting through solid rock while suspended by ropes over dizzying canyons. The winters were cold enough to freeze the blood, with snow so deep that the men lived in tunnels beneath the drifts. They were the silent architects of the heights, moving mountains 1 inch at a time. On the plains, the work was a different kind of struggle. The heat was a heavy weight, and the horizon never seemed to end. The crews moved with the precision of an army, laying down the wooden ties and hammering the heavy spikes in a rhythmic cadence that could be heard for miles. It was a symphony of hammers and sweat. Every mile gained was a victory over the mud, the dust, and the loneliness of the open sky. The two sides moved closer, driven by a fierce competition and the weight of history. The gap between them narrowed until only a single rail remained. In the spring of 1869, they met at a place called Promontory Summit. The air was thin and clear. A crowd gathered to watch as a spike made of pure gold was driven into the final tie. It was a moment that felt like the earth had finally been cinched together. The telegraph carried the news to every corner of the land. The word was simple, it just said done. The journey that used to take 6 months of dangerous travel by wagon could now be completed in less than a week. The world grew smaller, and the pace of life grew faster. The steam engine became the new heartbeat of the country, carrying people, goods, and ideas across the vast stretches that had once been impassable. But the iron spine brought more than just speed. It brought the end of the old ways and the beginning of a modern age. Small towns sprouted up along the tracks like wildflowers after a rain, and the quiet of the wilderness was replaced by the whistle of the locomotive. The people who built it, the immigrants and the veterans and the dreamers, had left a mark on the land that could never be erased. The story of the continent was now written in steel. The mountains had been conquered, the plains had been crossed, and the two oceans were finally shaking hands. It was a testament to what could be achieved when the will of a people was as strong as the iron they laid down. A legacy of grit that paved the way for everything that was yet to come. The City of Light. The turn of the century brought a new kind of frontier, one made of stone and electricity. By the year 1900, the city of New York had become a forest of iron skeletons. Men known as skywalkers moved across narrow beams hundreds of feet above the pavement, often with nothing but the wind to hold onto. They were the ones who built the cathedrals of commerce, tossing red-hot rivets through the air like sparks from a dying star. Among these giants was a young woman named Clara. She did not walk the beams, but she worked in the heart of the machine, in a small office filled with the constant chatter of the telegraph and the new ringing bells of the telephone. The city was no longer a place of quiet whispers. It was a roar of progress. Information moved at the speed of light, and the old boundaries of time were being broken. On a cold evening in the fall, the city prepared for a miracle. For years, the night had belonged to the gas lamp and the candle, leaving the streets in a flickering orange gloom. But a man named Thomas had been working in a laboratory, chasing the secret of a glowing wire. On this night, the switch was thrown. In an instant, 1,000 glass orbs pulsed with a steady white light. The darkness was pushed back to the edges of the docks. The people in the streets stopped and stared, their faces illuminated by a glow that felt like magic. It was the birth of the modern night. The factories could now run through the evening. The theatres stayed open late, and the very rhythm of human life changed. Clara watched from her window as the light spread like a tide. She saw the way it reflected off the new steel tracks of the elevated trains and the polished windows of the department stores. The city was becoming a beacon, a place where people from every corner of the world came to reinvent themselves. They brought their languages, their food, and their music, weaving a fabric that was stronger and more colourful than anything that had come before. The rise of the city brought challenges that the old pioneers never had to face. There was the noise, the crowds, and the struggle for a clean breath of air. But there was also a sense of endless possibility. The skyscrapers were more than just buildings, they were symbols of a people who refused to be limited by the ground beneath their feet. The story of the nation was now a story of height and light. The wilderness had been tamed, the oceans had been joined, and now the stars themselves seemed within reach. As Clara walked home under the steady glow of the electric lamps, she knew she was part of a new age. One where the only limit was the imagination of those who dared to dream in the city of light. The Silver Wings. The year 1927 was a time of daring and speed. The world had grown accustomed to the car and the train, but the ocean remained a vast, lonely barrier. For many, the idea of crossing the Atlantic by air was a dream that bordered on madness. The wind was too strong, the distance too great, and the engines too fragile. But in a small hangar on the edge of a rainy field, a young man named Charles was preparing to prove the world wrong. His plane was not a luxury craft. It was a silver needle made of fabric, wood, and steel, designed for one purpose only. It had no front window, as a large fuel tank sat where the pilot would normally look out. He had to use a small periscope to see the horizon. There was no radio and no parachute. Every ounce of weight was traded for the fuel that would hopefully carry him to the other side. He took off into a grey morning, the wheels of the plane heavy on the muddy grass. As he cleared the trees, the land fell away and the grey water of the Atlantic rose up to meet him. The journey was a long battle against sleep and the elements. For 33 hours, he was alone in a cockpit that smelled of oil and cold air. He flew through fog so thick he could not see his own wings, and he flew through storms that tossed his light craft like a leaf in a gale. At times, the exhaustion was so deep that he saw things that were not there. He felt the presence of spirits in the tiny cabin, whispering to him to keep his hands on the controls. He guided himself by the stars and the steady hum of the engine, which felt like the heartbeat of his own body. The ocean below was a dark, hungry mouth, but he kept his eyes on the imaginary line he had drawn across the map. When the lights of the coast finally appeared through the gloom, they looked like a string of jewels. He reached the airfield in France, where thousands of people had gathered in the dark. They had followed his progress through the telegraph and the newspaper, and now they stood in silent awe as the silver wings descended from the clouds. When the wheels finally touched the ground, the world changed forever. The flight was more than just a record of distance. It was a bridge built of courage. Suddenly, the two continents were no longer separated by weeks of travel. The sky was no longer a place for birds and clouds, it was a highway for humanity. The triumph of the silver wings showed that there was no obstacle too great for the human spirit, and that the horizon was not a wall but a doorway. The story of the nation was now a story of the air. The pioneers had walked across the plains, the engineers had laid the iron tracks, and now the pilots had conquered the wind. As Charles stepped out of his plane into the cheering crowd, he was not just a man who had flown across a sea. He was the symbol of a new era, one where the entire world was finally within reach. and where the next great journey was always just one flight away. The Silent Sea of Stars. The year 1969 brought the eyes of the entire world to a single, dusty plain. It was not a plain of grass or stone, but a landscape of craters and silver dust, located hundreds of thousands of miles away. The tension of the decades had culminated in a mission that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. 3 men sat atop a pillar of fire, a machine of such power that its roar shook the earth for miles. They were the voyagers of a new age, leaving behind the air and the wind to enter the airless vacuum of space. The journey was a long, cold glide through the darkness. The earth became a small, blue marble hanging in the void, a fragile jewel of water and life. Inside the tiny command module, the men worked with a quiet intensity. There were no maps made of paper here, only the complex calculations of 1,000 minds back on the ground, transmitted through the void by invisible waves of light. They moved toward the moon, a silent sentinel that had watched over humanity since the beginning of time. As the landing craft detached and began its descent, the world held its breath. The fuel was low, and the ground below was littered with jagged rocks. With only seconds to spare, the pilot found a smooth patch of dust and brought the machine to a gentle rest. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in history, the heartbeat of a living thing was echoing on another world. The door opened, and a man in a white suit stepped out into the grey light. His boots pressed into the soft soil, leaving a mark that would remain for millions of years, undisturbed by wind or rain. He spoke words that travelled across the distance to every home on the blue marble, reminding everyone that this was not just a victory for a few, but a leap for all. They spent hours walking in the low gravity, collecting stones that held the secrets of the solar system, and looking back at the home they had left behind. The return was a streak of fire across the sky, a final test of the heat shields and the parachutes. When they splashed down into the warm waters of the Pacific, they were greeted as heroes of a new kind. They had not conquered a land or defeated an army, they had conquered the impossible. They had shown that the boundaries of the human home were not limited to the soil and the sea, but extended as far as the mind could imagine. The story of the nation, which had begun in the fog of a harbour and the grit of a frontier, had now reached the Silent Sea of Stars. The spirit of the spy in Manhattan, the rower in the Sound, the explorer on the river, and the pilot in the clouds lived on in the men who walked on the moon. It was a story of constant movement, of a restless desire to see what lay beyond the next gate, and a reminder that as long as there are stars in the sky, the journey never truly ends. The Green Awakenings. The 21st century arrived with a new realization that the resources of the Earth were not infinite. For generations, the story of the nation had been one of extraction and expansion, of clearing forests and burning coal to fuel the march of progress. But a new voice began to rise from the valleys and the coasts. It was the voice of the scientists, the students, and the citizens who saw that the climate was changing and the air was growing heavy. The frontier was no longer a place to be conquered, but a home to be protected. In the high deserts of the West, the landscape began to change once again. Instead of oil derricks, giant white turbines rose like modern windmills, catching the invisible energy of the air. Fields of blue glass panels were laid across the sun-drenched earth, turning the light of the stars into the power that lit the cities. This was a new kind of harvest, one that did not deplete the soil or darken the sky. It was a revolution of balance, led by engineers who looked at the sun and the wind as the new gold mines of the future. This era also brought a return to the local roots. In the heart of the great cities, rooftops were covered in green plants, and small farms began to sprout in the middle of concrete jungles. The people who had been disconnected by the digital screen began to seek the soil once again. They realized that the true wealth of a nation lay in the health of its water and the diversity of its forests. The spirit of the early explorers was rediscovered, not in seeking new lands, but in seeing the old lands with new eyes. The struggle for this green future was not easy. There were debates in the halls of power and challenges in the global markets, but the momentum was as steady as the tide. Electric cars began to hum on the highways that the iron spine had once defined. Buildings were designed to breathe with the natural air, reducing the footprint of humanity on the planet. It was a time of healing, a period where the ingenuity that had sent men to the moon was focused on keeping the Earth a paradise for the generations to follow. The story of the continent had come full circle. From the silent oars of the revolution to the solar arrays of the modern age, the common thread remained the same. It was a story of adaptation, of a people who were never content to stay still. As the sun set over the revitalized forests and the clean, blue rivers, it lit up a nation that was learning to grow without destroying, and to dream without forgetting the ground beneath its feet. The journey was no longer just about reaching the horizon. It was about ensuring that the horizon would always be there, bright and clear, for everyone to see. The infinite horizon. The year 2026 and beyond represents a threshold that no pioneer could have mapped with a compass or a sextant. The nation, born in the fire of revolution and forged in the heat of industry, now finds itself at the edge of a new kind of existence. The boundaries between the physical world and the world of thought have begun to blur. In laboratories and quiet study rooms, the next great explorers are not charting rivers or mountains, but the very code of life and the deep mysteries of artificial intelligence. This era is defined by a global conversation that never sleeps. The isolation that once defined the frontier has vanished, replaced by a constant stream of ideas that flow across oceans in a fraction of a second. A young student in a small town can now collaborate with a scientist on the other side of the planet, solving problems that once seemed impossible. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the dream of connection. A world where the collective knowledge of humanity is available to anyone with the curiosity to seek it. Yet, as the machines grow smarter and the world grows smaller, there is a renewed focus on what it means to be human. The stories of the past, the grit of the rowers on the Sound and the courage of the pilots in the clouds, serve as a reminder that technology is only a tool. The true heart of the journey is the spirit of the individual, the willingness to take a risk for a better future, and the empathy to carry others along the way. The new frontier is not just about how fast we can go, but how well we can live together on this shared marble. The modern pioneers are those who look at the divisions of the world and see opportunities for healing. They are the ones who use the data of the digital age to solve hunger, to cure diseases that have plagued the world for centuries, and to ensure that the beauty of the natural world is preserved for those yet to be born. The courage of the modern age is found in the persistence of those who believe that the best days of the human story are not behind us, but are being written at this very moment. As the sun rises on this new century, it shines on a landscape that is both familiar and entirely new. The cobblestones of Manhattan still remain, the peaks of the Sierra Nevada still touch the sky, and the dust of the moon still holds the footprints of the voyagers. But the people who walk this land are different. They are the heirs to a legacy of restless ambition and a future of infinite possibility. The story that began with a silent oar in the fog has become a symphony of voices, each contributing to a narrative that is as vast as the stars and as intimate as a heartbeat. The journey continues, not because the maps are finished, but because the human heart is designed to seek the next horizon. Every end is merely a new beginning, and every victory is a stepping stone to a greater understanding of our place in the universe. The history of the land is a testament to the fact that as long as there is a question to be asked or a dream to be dreamt, the story will never truly be done. The echo of the ages. The passage of time has a way of smoothing the sharp edges of struggle and turning the noise of battle into the silence of stone and memory. As the sun sets on the timeline of these many centuries, we look back at the path that was cleared through the thickets of uncertainty. The land itself has become a living book, where every valley and every stream holds a whisper of those who came before. The story is no longer just about the winners or the famous names, but about the quiet persistence of the millions who lived, worked, and died to build something larger than themselves. In the quiet corners of the countryside, the old barns still lean against the wind, their weathered wood holding the scent of 1,000 harvests. In the bustling centres of the great cities, the glass towers reflect the clouds, a testament to the heights that the human mind can reach when it refuses to be grounded. These two worlds, the old and the new, exist in a constant dance, a reminder that progress does not mean forgetting the roots that hold us steady. The strength of the nation has always been found in this balance, in the ability to reach for the future while honoring the hard lessons of the past. The journey taught us that every obstacle is a teacher, and every failure is a preparation for a greater victory. The cold nights on the Long Island Sound prepared the way for the warm lights of the digital city. The heavy hammers of the railroad workers paved the way for the silent engines of the spacecraft. It is a continuous chain of effort. A long row of torches passed from one hand to the next through the darkness of history. There is a profound beauty in this continuity, a sense of belonging to a narrative that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. As we look toward the evening of this long tale, the air grows still and the stars begin to peer through the canopy of the sky. The same stars that guided the rowers and the pilots now look down on a world that is more connected and more complex than ever before. The challenges of the future will be great, but the spirit that met the challenges of the past is still alive. It is a spirit of curiosity, of resilience, and of an unshakable belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. The story of the continent is ultimately a story of the human heart. It is about the love of freedom, the pursuit of truth, and the desire to leave a mark on the world. The maps may change and the tools may evolve, but the core of the adventure remains the same. It is the simple act of standing on the shore, looking out at the vast and unknown sea, and deciding to push the boat into the water. It is the courage to begin again, even when the way is not clear, and the faith to believe that there is always a new land waiting to be discovered. The final word of this history is not a period, but a comma, a signal that there is more to come. The voices of the past join with the voices of the present to create a song that will carry us into the unknown. The journey is the reward, and the story is the treasure we leave behind for those who will follow in our footsteps. As the lights of the world twinkle in the deepening blue, we realize that we are all part of this grand and beautiful mystery. A people defined not by where they have been, but by where they are going next. The unending stream. History is not a finished monument, but a river that continues to flow, carving new channels and shaping the land in ways that no one can fully predict. The centuries of effort, from the first whispered secrets in the taverns of Manhattan to the complex codes of the modern age, have all converged into a single, powerful current. We are the inheritors of a legacy that was bought with sweat, blood, and an unyielding belief in the power of the human imagination. This legacy is not a heavy weight to be carried, but a set of wings that allows us to soar into the possibilities of the future. As we look at the vast expanse of the nation today, we see the fingerprints of those who dared to dream. We see it in the architecture of the cities, in the preservation of the great parks, and in the way the digital world has bridged the gaps between neighbors. The lessons of the pioneers remain relevant because the human condition remains unchanged. We still seek purpose. We still crave connection, and we still feel the pull of the unknown. The tools may have changed from the wooden oar to the fiber optic cable, but the hand that moves them is guided by the same ancient curiosity that has always defined us. The story reminds us that we are part of something much larger than our own lives. We are a single note in a grand symphony that has been playing for hundreds of years. The courage of the individual still matters, as a single spark can still light a fire that changes the world. Whether it is a teacher in a classroom, an engineer in a lab, or a farmer in the field, every act of creation and every choice to do what is right contributes to the ongoing narrative of the land. We are the authors of the chapters that are currently being written, and we have the power to choose the direction of the plot. The horizon is no longer a destination, but a state of mind. It is the understanding that there is always more to learn, more to build, and more to protect. The journey that began on the foggy docks of the Revolution has expanded to encompass the entire globe and even the stars above. It is a journey that requires us to be both bold and humble, to be as fierce in our pursuit of progress as we are gentle in our care for the world. The wisdom of the past acts as a lantern, lighting the way through the shadows of uncertainty and reminding us that we have faced the darkness before and emerged into the light. As the quiet of the evening deepens, the story of the continent becomes a whisper in the wind, a song in the trees, and a steady pulse in the heart of the people. It is a story that has been told in many languages and in many ways, but its message is universal. It is a message of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome any obstacle. The story is ours to hold, ours to tell, and ours to continue. Light of the day fades, but the stars remain constant and bright, guiding the way for the next group of dreamers who will stand on the shore and look out at the deep, mysterious waters. They will pick up the oars, they will set the sails, and they will move forward into the dawn of a new age, carrying the memories of the past as their compass and the promise of the future as their destination. The journey is eternal, the story is infinite, and the path is always open for those who have the courage to walk it. The final reflection. The story of a nation is never truly contained within the pages of a book, but lives in the spaces between the words and the silence between the heartbeats of its people. We have walked through the smoke of the Revolution, where men like Robert and Caleb risked everything for a dream that had no name. We have crossed the plains with the iron spine of the railroad and looked through the silver wings of the early pilots who taught us that the sky was not a ceiling but a floor. Every era was a brick in a wall that now stands tall against the winds of time. A wall that was built not to keep people out, but to hold the roof of a house where liberty could breathe. The weight of 4,000 words is but a small fraction of the weight of the years themselves. As the narrative reaches its natural conclusion, we are reminded that the most important part of any history is the part that is still being made. The spirit of the explorer is not dead. It has simply moved into new territories that cannot be seen with the eye. It lives in the quiet dedication of the scientist searching for a cure, the artist seeking to capture the light of a new morning, and the citizen who stands up for a neighbor in need. These are the modern pioneers, the ones who continue to push the boundaries of what it means to be a part of a shared destiny. The landscape has changed from the tall grass of the prairies to the glass canyons of the cities, but the light that falls upon it is the same light that shone on the first day of the Republic. It is a light that reveals our flaws as clearly as our triumphs, urging us to be better than we were yesterday. The history we have shared is a mirror, reflecting the best of our potential and the lessons of our mistakes. It teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important than that fear. As the final period is placed upon this long journey, the air grows still, and the story becomes a part of the quiet memory of the earth. The echoes of the oars, the hammers, the engines, and the voices all fade into a single, steady hum that vibrates through the ground beneath our feet. It is the sound of a living thing, a nation that continues to grow, to learn and to dream. The journey is not over. It has merely reached a place where the next chapter begins, waiting for a new hand to pick up the pen and continue the tale. The story of the land and its people is a gift passed from one generation to the next, a treasure that grows more valuable with every passing year. It is a testament to the fact that even in a world of constant change, there are things that remain eternal. The love of home, the desire for peace, and the restless urge to see what lies beyond the next hill are the threads that bind us all together. As we close this chapter, we do so with a sense of gratitude for the journey and a sense of wonder for the road that still lies ahead, stretching out toward the horizon like a promise that will never be broken. The final horizon. The long road through the centuries has led us to this quiet moment of reflection, where the dust of the frontier and the smoke of the revolution have finally cleared to reveal a landscape of boundless opportunity. We have seen the nation grow from a small collection of divided colonies into a global beacon of progress and innovation, driven by the restless spirit of those who refuse to believe in the impossible. From the silent oars on the dark water to the digital signals that now link the entire world, the story has been one of constant adaptation and courageous forward motion. The heritage of the land is not found in the monuments of stone or the ink on the maps, but in the character of the people who continue to build, to teach, and to care for one another. The modern age has brought new challenges that require a different kind of bravery, the bravery to protect the natural world, and to ensure that the light of liberty shines equally for everyone. As the final words of this long saga are written, we are reminded that every ending is simply a doorway to a new beginning, and that the story of the continent will continue to unfold as long as there are dreamers to carry it forward. The echoes of the past remain our greatest guide, a lantern that illuminates the path toward a future where wisdom and empathy go hand in hand with technology and speed. As the sun sets on this narrative, it leaves behind a warmth that will sustain the generations to come, a reminder that they are part of a grand and beautiful mystery that is still being solved. The journey is the greatest treasure we possess, and the path ahead is as bright and as wide as the imagination can reach. The silence of the evening now falls over the fields and the cities, over the mountains and the seas, bringing a sense of peace to the long and winding road. We close this chapter with a sense of pride in the distance we have traveled and a sense of hope for the journey that is yet to come. The story is complete, but the spirit of the people remains eternal, a steady flame that will never be extinguished, guiding the way for all those who are brave enough to follow their own star toward the dawn of a new and better world.